My Country, Australian Poetry and Short Stories, 200 Years. As you can see, these look not exactly identical because the front thing here is different, but these kind of look the same. Spines are very similar, although, look, all this is the same, and then it says volume 1 and volume 2. I'm going through all this because I picked these up at a book fair. They were like $3 each. But what happened was I thought that they were identical. You know, sometimes at a book fair, they have like 5 copies of the same thing, or 12 copies of the same thing, or 2 copies of the same thing. And so I thought that this was 2 copies of the same book. I thought that it was Beginnings to 1930 or something. I don't even know what I thought. I was like, oh, cool. Australian Poetry and Short Stories, 200 years of Australian poetry and short stories. And so I sort of looked at them both and I said, well, all right, this one kind of bound okay, but kind of falling apart a little bit, not very much. This one kind of has a stain there, and you know, I'm sort of looking at them and I went, all right, well then I picked the one that I liked, that I thought was prettier, and left the other one there, paid my $3 or $4 or whatever it was, and walked out the door. And then it's a monthly fair, so they don't have it again for a whole month, and they closed it down. And when I got home, it wasn't until I was actually logging the book, because I log my books in an app. To keep track of them all, where they are in the bookshelf, and you know, some things about them. And I saw in the log it said volume 1, and I went, oh, wait a minute. I only got volume 1, and I thought that other one was volume 2, and I just didn't even notice. I somehow didn't even notice that, you know, that these were different. So I called them. I called the fair people. In the meantime, I'll show you what the book looks like and how it's bound. It definitely looks like glue, but still it's bound in such a way that you can open it up flat, and so it doesn't crack the spine or anything. I called them up and they said, we can find that book for you. And they found the book for me, and I drove to someone's house, some guy's house, and he had the book for me, and it was great. And so of course I made a little donation to their charity. The book fair was for charity anyway, and because I was really happy. It was not a huge donation. I'm not like $20 or something. I was like, let me pay you $20 for the book. Anyway, they have these cool illustrations throughout. And they've got, yeah, it's short stories and poetry. And it goes from the beginnings of Australia, which I assume is going to go, you know, so I barely looked at them. You know, way back. So that's Matthew Flinders was one of the founders, you know, sort of the early people of Australia. They don't have. Let's see here. They have the birth and death of the author, but not, at least here. That's the birth and death of the author. It doesn't, not when it was actually written. But anyway, let's see here. We're talking about the 1700s is when it starts. This first volume goes through to the 1930s. And then the next volume goes through until the 1980s. Yeah, pretty good production value. You know, it feels pretty good. And as I say, it's got these sort of illustrations. It's not, I wouldn't call it like packed with illustrations, but it has some pretty cool illustrations throughout the tiger snake. And I think it's great. It's a great addition to my shelf. I mean, I live in Australia, and so maybe if you didn't live in Australia or didn't have a particular interest in Australia, you wouldn't really care about short stories and poems that are particularly Australian. But I do. So I thought to myself, you know, I've got a lot of stuff about England, and I've never lived in England. Let's start getting some stuff about Australia. So that's what I've done. Some really cool illustrations throughout, the black and white ones, and then these on their own pages, you know, that really take the color really nicely. It's very vibrant. All right, so there we go. That's my story. My Country, Australian Poetry and Short Stories, 200 years, from the beginnings back in 1700s all the way to the 1980s.